Welcome to the Life Paradox, where reality is stranger than fiction. Michael Anderson stared at the velvet box in his trembling hands. The jewelry store's logo glimmered under his living room lights as afternoon shadows stretched across the hardwood floor. 25 years of marriage had taught him many things about his wife, Grace. Her preference for silver over gold, her love of sapphires that matched her eyes, and how she valued thoughtfulness over extravagance. Yet today, on their silver anniversary, he had broken their unspoken rule: never spend beyond their means. The diamond necklace cost 3 months' salary. A reckless purchase for a high school English teacher, but Michael had his reasons. Reasons that tightened his chest and made his palms sweat against the soft velvet box. Every paradox begins with a question. If you love unraveling life's biggest mysteries, hit subscribe and join the Life Paradox, where every story bends reality. Michael tucked the box into his jacket pocket as he heard Grace's car pull into the driveway. The familiar sound of her footsteps on the porch, the jingle of her keys, 25 years, and his heart still quickened at her approach. She entered with grocery bags, her honey blonde hair caught in the collar of her coat, reading glasses perched on her head where she always forgot them. "Need help?" he asked, taking the bags and stealing a kiss. Thank you." She smiled, that same smile that had captivated him decades ago at a college mixer. "Happy anniversary, by the way." "I thought we'd celebrate properly tonight," Michael said. "I made reservations at Emilio's." It was where they'd had their first real date, a place they could rarely afford now. Grace's eyebrows rose. "Emilio's? That's unexpected. Is everything okay? Can't a man spoil his wife on their anniversary?" Michael forced a lightness into his voice that he didn't feel. At the restaurant, beneath soft lighting and the melody of distant violins, Michael watched Grace sip her wine. The years had been kind to her, laugh lines framing her eyes like parentheses around joy, silver strands illuminating her blonde hair. She was talking about her day at the pediatrician's office, animated when describing the children she'd treated. The weight of the velvet box burned in his pocket. "You seem distracted," Grace observed, setting down her glass. "What is it?" "I have something for you." Michael withdrew the box and placed it on the white tablecloth between them. Grace went still. Their eyes met across the table, hers questioning, his pleading. They had survived on a teacher's and pediatrician's salaries, paid off student loans, raised 2 children now in college, and weathered the economic downturns with careful frugality. Extravagant gifts had never been their way. "Michael," Grace's voice wavered as she reached for the box. "Open it," he whispered. With hesitant fingers, she lifted the lid. The diamond pendant caught the light, scattering rainbows across her face. A perfect teardrop suspended on a platinum chain, simple, elegant, and unmistakably beyond their means. "It's beautiful, but—" Her voice trailed off, concern shadowing her features. "How did you afford this?" The question hung between them, like a guillotine blade. Michael swallowed hard. Behind his carefully constructed facade, secrets threatened to spill. Secrets he'd kept for months, hoping he would never have to reveal them. But as Grace's eyes met his, demanding truth without words, Michael knew the time for hiding was over. "I've been meaning to tell you something," Michael said, his voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient murmur. He reached for his water glass, buying seconds to compose himself. "Do you remember when I started getting those headaches? Back in January." Grace nodded slowly, her fingers still resting on the edge of the jewelry box, the diamond's brilliance momentarily forgotten. "The ones you said were from stress? From the new curriculum mandates?" Michael looked down at the tablecloth, tracing invisible patterns with his fingertip. "I went to see Dr. Bennett. Not just once, like I told you." The lie had been small at first, a single appointment becoming 2, then 3, then specialized, Tests that he scheduled during his planning periods at school. There were scans, blood work. Michael. Grace's voice hardened with sudden understanding. What are you saying? He forced himself to meet her gaze. 3 months ago, they found something. A tumor. In my brain. The words hung between them, stark and irreversible. It's benign, but it's growing in a complicated location. Grace's face drained of color. The violinist in the corner moved into a melancholy piece, eerily appropriate for the moment their celebration transformed into something else entirely. That's why I bought the necklace, Michael continued, words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. I cashed in my life insurance policy, the one my father left me. I've been saving it all these years, but I needed to give you something permanent, something to remember. Stop. Grace closed the jewelry box with a sharp snap. Just stop. Her hands trembled as she reached across the table, gripping his with surprising strength. Why didn't you tell me? All these months? Michael's explanation dried in his throat. How could he articulate the paralysis of fear? The desperate hope that ignoring it might somehow make it disappear? Or worse, the selfish desire to spare himself from watching her suffer alongside him. Surgery is scheduled for next Thursday, he said instead. They think they can remove most of it, but there's a risk. The location makes it complicated. Grace's professional composure, the one she wore like armor when delivering difficult news to parents, slipped entirely. Next Thursday? And you're telling me now? Tonight? She released his hands and sat back, shoulders rigid. Who drives you home after these appointments? Who takes notes when the doctor explains procedures? Who asks the questions you're too afraid to ask? I didn't want to worry you, Michael said weakly. That wasn't your decision to make. Her voice broke. 25 years, Michael. 25 years of partnership, and you shut me out when it mattered most. The waiter approached with their entrees, sensed the tension, and silently retreated. Around them, other anniversary celebrations and business dinners continued, oblivious to their quiet devastation. The headaches were getting worse, Michael admitted. I was forgetting things. Small things at first, where I put my keys, students, names. Then last week I couldn't remember what year we got married. Tears welled in his eyes. That scared me more than any diagnosis. Grace reached for her purse. Michael thought she might leave. He wouldn't blame her. But instead, she withdrew a small, wrapped package. I got you something too. Michael unwrapped it with clumsy fingers. Inside was an antique pocket watch, the one he'd admired in the vintage shop downtown months ago, but had decided was an unnecessary expense. I've been working extra shifts, Grace explained quietly, to save for it. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. She'd given him time. He'd given her permanence. Both had sacrificed, kept secrets, tried to protect. I need to see the medical reports. Grace's voice had shifted to her doctor tone, controlled, analytical, the same voice she used when a difficult case came into her pediatric practice. She dabbed at the corner of her eye with her napkin, leaving a small smudge of mascara. Everything. Every test result, every scan, every consultation note. Michael nodded, knowing this transformation was her way of coping. In the face of emotional upheaval, Grace became methodical. It was one of the countless things he'd learned to love about her, this ability to channel fear into action. They're in my desk drawer, the bottom one with the lock. He reached into his pocket and placed a small key on the table. I keep it, locked so the kids wouldn't find anything when they came home for spring break. The kids? Grace's composure faltered momentarily. James and Lily don't know. It wasn't a question, but Michael shook his head anyway. I didn't want to worry them during finals. James has his graduate school applications, and Lily's internship. They deserve to know, Grace interrupted. They're not children anymore. Michael, They're adults who love their father. The waiter returned, this time more determined to deliver their cooling entrees. They accepted the plates with murmured thanks, though neither had any appetite remaining. Michael watched as Grace mechanically cut her salmon into perfect squares, a habit from her surgical rotation days that had never faded. "What's the surgeon's name?" Grace asked after the waiter departed. "Dr. Elaine Werner, neurosurgery at University Medical." Grace nodded with recognition. "I've heard of her. She's good." She set down her fork without taking a bite. "What's the exact location? The type? The size?" Michael reached for his wallet and removed a folded paper, his most recent scan report, which he'd carried everywhere, as if keeping it close somehow contained the threat. He passed it to Grace, whose eyes quickly scanned the medical terminology with practiced ease. "Meningioma, right frontal lobe, 4 centimeters. Her voice was steady, but her hand trembled slightly as she refolded the paper. "And memory loss is your only symptom?" "Headaches, some dizziness. The memory issues started about a month ago." Michael pushed his untouched steak aside. "I've been keeping a journal of symptoms. That's locked away too." A heavy silence fell between them, punctuated by the clink of cutlery from neighboring tables and the soft notes of the violin. 25 years together, and now this vast chasm of unsaid words and unshared experiences stretched between them. "I haven't worn jewelry in years," Grace finally said, her fingers tracing the edge of the velvet box. "Not since my grandmother's. Pearl earrings were stolen when our apartment was broken into." "Remember that? Before we bought the house?" Michael remembered. They'd been married just 3 years, struggling with student loans and Grace's medical residency hours. The pearls had been her most valuable possession, not financially, but emotionally. A connection to the grandmother who had raised her after her parents' accident. "You said material things could be replaced," Michael recalled. "People couldn't. And you stayed up all night installing new locks on the doors and windows." Grace's lips curved slightly at the memory. "You were so angry on my behalf." "I still am," Michael admitted. "I think about those pearls sometimes, how they should be yours to wear today." Grace opened the jewelry box again, studying the diamond, pendant with complicated emotions flitting across her face. "This is beautiful, but it's not what I want from you." "What do you want?" Michael asked, his voice barely audible. "Time," she answered immediately. "More years, more anniversaries. I want you to fight this with everything you have. Not just for me, but for yourself. And I want to fight alongside you, not be protected from it." Michael reached across the table, taking her hand. "I'm sorry. I thought I was being strong." "Strength isn't carrying burdens alone," Grace said. "It's knowing when to share them." "When did you get so wise?" Michael attempted a smile. "Sometime during those 25 years you weren't paying attention." Her answering smile held sadness, but also determination. "Now, we're going to pay for this absurdly expensive dinner you ordered. Go home, and you're going to show me every piece of paper, every note, everything the doctors have told you. Then we're calling the kids." The house was unusually quiet when they returned, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway marking seconds with solemn persistence. Michael felt oddly like a stranger in his own home, watching Grace move through familiar routines with mechanical precision, hanging her coat, placing her keys in the ceramic dish by the door, slipping off her shoes. "Tea?" she asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "I'll get my files first," Michael replied, heading for his study. His hand hesitated on the desk drawer handle. For months, this drawer had been his fortress of solitude, housing the reality he'd tried to keep separate from their everyday life. Now, with a turn of the key, those carefully maintained boundaries would dissolve. The drawer slid open with a soft rumble. Inside lay a green medical folder, bulging with papers, referrals, scan results, consultation notes, surgical consent, forms already signed. Beside it sat a thin black notebook where he documented his symptoms with the same diligence he applied to grading student essays. By the time he returned to the kitchen, Grace had prepared 2 mugs of chamomile tea, her universal remedy since their college days. She'd changed from her anniversary dinner outfit into worn flannel pajamas, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked both more vulnerable and stronger this way. "I've made notes of questions," she said, gesturing to a yellow legal pad on the kitchen table. Even in crisis, Grace was organized, methodical. "And I texted Dr. Harriman. You remember her from medical school? She's in neurology now. She'll call tomorrow morning." Michael placed the folder and notebook on the table, then sat heavily across from her. "There's more," he admitted, reaching into his pocket for another folded paper, smaller, worn from frequent handling. "My updated will." Grace accepted it without opening it, placing it deliberately at the bottom of the stack. "That can wait." For the next 3 hours, they transformed their kitchen table into a war room. Grace read every document, occasionally making notes or circling terms she wanted clarified. Michael watched her professional mask slip into place, the same focused expression she wore when diagnosing complex cases at her practice. "You're getting the best possible care," she finally said, rubbing her tired eyes. "Werner has an excellent reputation for complex resections." "I know." Michael reached for her hand across the cluttered table. "That's why I chose her." "But 4 centimeters." Grace frowned at the scan report. "That's not small, Michael. And the location explains the memory issues." "They found it early," he offered, attempting reassurance. "The headaches were a blessing." In disguise, Grace managed a weak smile at his characteristic optimism. "Only you would call brain tumor symptoms a blessing." The clock in the hallway chimed midnight, marking the official end of their anniversary. 25 years and 1 day of marriage now. "We should call the kids," Michael said, though his body ached with exhaustion. Grace glanced at her watch. "James will still be awake. You know his night owl habits. But Lily has early hospital rounds for her internship." They compromised, sending texts asking both children to be available for a video call the following evening. The carefully worded message, "We need to talk about something important, but everyone is okay right now," would undoubtedly cause concern, but it was better than dropping such news in a late-night text. As they prepared for bed, the practiced choreography of their nightly routine, brushing teeth side by side at the dual sinks, Grace applying night cream, Michael setting the alarm, felt suddenly precious. Michael caught Grace watching him in the bathroom mirror, her eyes tracking his movements as if memorizing them. "I'm still here," he said softly. "I know." She tucked herself against his side as they walked to their bedroom. "And I'm going to make damn sure you stay that way." In bed, they lay facing each other in the darkness, closer than they had in months. Michael realized how his secret had created physical distance between them as well. His fear of breaking down had manifested in pulling away, in fewer casual touches, in sleeping turned away to hide grimaces of pain. "I have a confession," Grace whispered into the darkness. "When you gave me that necklace, before you told me everything, I thought you might be having an affair." "An affair?" The word felt foreign in Michael's mouth, almost comical in its absurdity. "Why would you think that?" In the dim glow of streetlight filtering through their curtains, he could make out Grace's expression, a mixture of embarrassment and lingering worry. "You've been distant," she explained. "Coming home late, taking calls in another room, disappearing for hours without explanation, and suddenly you're spending money we don't have on expensive jewelry." She shrugged one shoulder. "It's the classic script." Michael felt a pang of guilt sharper than any headache. In trying to protect her from one pain, he'd inflicted another. "I'm sorry. I never thought how it might look. These past few months, I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Grace continued. That after 25 years, I should have more faith. But then I'd find another gap in your schedule I couldn't account for, or catch you closing browser windows when I entered the room. Medical websites, Michael explained. Research studies on experimental treatments. Survival statistics I didn't want you to see. Grace's hand found his in the darkness, her wedding ring pressing against his palm. Promise me something. No more secrets, not even well-intentioned ones. I promise. The words came easily now, relief flooding through him at having the truth exposed. Though I should clarify that the browser windows thing wasn't always medical. Research. Sometimes it was me trying to figure out what to get you for our anniversary. Her soft laugh loosened something in his chest. For future reference, diamonds weren't on my wish list, though I admit, it's beautiful. What would you have wanted instead? Michael asked, genuinely curious. Honestly? Concert tickets. Maybe? That jazz pianist you introduced me to on our 5th date. What was his name? Marcus Ellison. Michael supplied, surprised she remembered. You fell asleep halfway through the performance. I was a sleep-deprived medical resident, Grace protested. Besides, I remember enough to know I enjoyed it. His music reminded me of raindrops on windows. Michael made a mental note. If there was to be a 26th anniversary, it would involve concert tickets, not jewelry. They lay in comfortable silence for several minutes, the weight of the day's revelations settling around them like a heavy blanket. Michael was drifting toward sleep when Grace spoke again. I'm taking time off, she announced. Starting Monday. I've accumulated months of unused vacation days. You don't have to. I want to, she interrupted firmly. Carla can cover my patients. She's been asking for more hours anyway. Michael knew better than to argue. When Grace decided on a course of action, particularly regarding family care, resistance was futile. It was the same determination that had gotten her through medical school while pregnant with James, that had rebuilt their roof after the storm damage insurance wouldn't cover, that had nursed both children through chicken pox simultaneously without complaint. What about your presentation at the pediatric conference next month? He asked instead. Dr. Werner said 6 to 8 weeks recovery time, assuming no complications. Grace replied, her tone making it clear the decision was already made. The conference isn't important. Your research on childhood anxiety treatments is important, Michael countered. He'd watched her work on that presentation for months, perfecting slides late into the night. Not as important as this. Her voice wavered, slightly. When they open your skull next Thursday, I'm going to be there, not in some conference hall across the country. Michael felt tears pressing behind his eyelids. What did I do to deserve you? You wooed me with bad poetry and homemade pasta, Grace reminded him, her voice lightening. Very persistent wooing, if I recall. That pasta was excellent, Michael protested with mock indignation. The pasta was decent. The poetry was terrible. I was an English major, which made it worse. Grace laughed softly. You should have known better. This familiar, comfortable banter steadied them both. For a few precious moments, they weren't a patient and caregiver, weren't facing mortality and uncertainty. They were just Michael and Grace, teasing each other about decades-old memories. We should try to sleep, Grace finally said, reaching over to stroke his cheek. Tomorrow will be a long day. Michael nodded, though he doubted sleep would come easily. Already his mind was racing with everything that needed to be done, preparing his substitute teacher plans, organizing medical leave paperwork, planning how to tell their children. Grace seemed to read his thoughts. One day at a time, she murmured, her doctor's voice returning. That's how we'll handle this. Sunday morning arrived with gentle autumn sunshine filtering through their bedroom curtains. Michael woke first, momentarily disoriented by Grace's arm draped across his chest. She usually rose before him, especially on weekends. Then, yesterday's Revelations crashed back into his consciousness. She was watching him, he realized. Had probably been awake for some time, studying his sleeping face. "Morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "How's your head?" The question was casual, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. "Fine." At her skeptical look, he amended, "A 4 out of 10, better than yesterday." Grace nodded, accepting his assessment. "The kids will be calling at 5. James confirmed he'll be free then." Michael checked the bedside clock, 10:37. Nearly 7 hours until they would have to break the news to their children. The prospect made his stomach churn more than any medical procedure. "We should make a plan," he suggested, sitting up against the headboard. "What exactly will tell them?" Grace was already reaching for the notepad she kept on her nightstand. Another doctor habit, being prepared to jot down thoughts at any hour. "We need to be honest but not alarmist. Factual about risks without being pessimistic." They spent the morning drafting talking points, anticipating questions, and discussing whether the children should come home before the surgery. Michael advocated for maintaining normalcy. They have midterms, responsibilities, while Grace argued for family togetherness. Some things are more important than academics. They compromised. The children would decide for themselves, with all information provided and no parental pressure either way. After a light lunch that neither could finish, they wandered into their backyard, settling on the wooden bench Michael had built when James was learning to walk. The garden was in its autumn transition, summer blossoms fading while chrysanthemums prevailed among fallen leaves. "I was planning to put in spring bulbs next weekend," Michael commented, surveying the flower beds he meticulously maintained. "Tulips and daffodils," Grace squeezed his hand. "You'll plant them in November instead. They'll still bloom in spring." The simple confidence in her voice nearly undid him, her unwavering belief that there would be a November for him, a spring to witness. They spent the afternoon in quiet domesticity, folding laundry, preparing a simple dinner, organizing the medical documents to share with their children digitally after the call. These mundane tasks took on ritual significance, anchoring them in normalcy before everything changed. At 4:45, they settled in Michael's study with the laptop open, 2 mugs of tea growing cold on the desk. Grace wore her mom sweater, a soft blue cardigan the children had given her years ago, while Michael had unconsciously dressed in the Oxford shirt James had helped him select for his interview at Westridge High, where he'd taught for nearly 20 years. The video call connected. At exactly 5 o'clock, the screen split to show their children's faces. James in his apartment near Berkeley's campus, surrounded by stacked textbooks. Lily in her small student housing unit at Johns Hopkins, still wearing scrubs from her hospital rotation. "Mom, Dad. Happy belated anniversary!" Lily's smile was bright, though her eyes showed the fatigue of medical training. At 22, she was the spitting image of Grace at that age. Same determined chin, same analytical gaze. "Sorry I couldn't call yesterday," James added, running a hand through his unruly dark hair, Michael's hair, before the gray had crept in. "The climate policy symposium ran late, and then there was this dinner thing with Professor Abrams." "It's fine, sweetheart," Grace assured him. "We had a quiet celebration." Michael watched their children's expressions shift as they registered, the unusual solemnity in their parents' demeanor. James, ever the perceptive one, narrowed his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked directly. "Your text sounded serious." Michael glanced at Grace, who nodded slightly. They'd agreed he would take the lead. "I have some medical news to share," he began, his professor's voice steady despite the tremor in his hands below the camera's view. 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor." The words hung in the digital space between them. Lily's hand flew to her mouth, her medical training making the implications immediately clear. James went completely still, his expression frozen. "It's a meningioma," Michael continued, following their carefully prepared script. Benign, but in a location. That makes removal complicated. I'm having surgery this Thursday with Dr. Elaine Werner at University Medical. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Lily demanded, Dr. Mode activating just like her mother's had. 3 months, Dad? Seriously? I just found out myself, Grace interjected softly. Your father thought he was protecting everyone by handling it alone. That's... James started, then stopped, visibly processing. That's such a dad thing to do. Despite everything, Michael felt a small smile tug at his lips. Not my finest decision, I admit. What followed was a barrage of medical questions from Lily, practical inquiries from James, and emotional moments from them all. Michael shared his symptoms, treatment plan, and prognosis. Good, if we can get clean margins. While Grace outlined her leave of absence and post-surgical care arrangements. I'm coming home, Lily announced firmly, already reaching for her phone. I can request emergency family leave from my program director. Me too, James added without hesitation. I'll drive down Tuesday. You don't have to, Michael began. We want to, James interrupted. Need to, actually. For us as much as for you. Looking at his children's resolute faces, so adult now, so capable, Michael felt something shift within him. The weight he'd carried alone for months suddenly seemed lighter, distributed now across the 4 of them like points of a compass, steadying him in the center. Thursday arrived with surgical precision, inevitable, exact, impossible to postpone. Michael woke before dawn, Grace's arm draped protectively across his chest, and allowed himself 5 minutes of quiet terror before deliberately replacing it, with methodical calm. The hospital admissions process passed in a blur of paperwork, consent forms, and preoperative protocols. Grace's professional status smoothed their path somewhat, nurses and orderlies recognizing Dr. Anderson's husband with sympathetic efficiency. In the surgical preparation room, Michael lay on the narrow bed while a nurse inserted his IV line. Grace, James, and Lily stood nearby, maintaining careful composure. They had all agreed. No tearful goodbyes, no dramatic declarations. Just family togetherness until the last possible moment. Professor Dad, James said, using his childhood nickname for Michael. I brought something for you. He reached into his messenger bag and withdrew a leather-bound journal. I thought you might want this for when you're recovering. Michael accepted it with his free hand, thumbing through blank pages. For more symptom tracking? James shook his head. For a different kind of writing. Remember how you always talked about writing that novel someday? About the high school teacher who solves historical mysteries? Michael felt his throat tighten. How many times had he mentioned that someday project? Decades of when I have time and after retirement excuses. Thank you, he managed, genuinely touched that James had remembered his oft-mentioned but never started ambition. Lily stepped forward next, placing something small and soft on his blanket-covered chest. My lucky penguin, she explained, indicating the small stuffed animal she'd carried through countless childhood illnesses and exams. I figured his luck could transfer to you today. Penguins are excellent navigators, Michael replied, playing along with the familiar family joke about the toy's supposed powers. I could use some guidance through the brain fog they say might follow surgery. The anesthesiologist arrived then, cheerfully checking Michael's chart. Time for the pre-surgical cocktail, Mr. Anderson. This will make you drowsy before we wheel. You in? Grace moved closer, professional demeanor momentarily cracking. I'll be waiting when you wake up, she promised, squeezing his hand. All of us will. As the medication began to take effect, Michael looked at his family. Grace with her controlled concern, James anxiously tapping his foot but trying to appear relaxed, Lily in full medical student mode monitoring the IV drip rate. He wanted to memorize them exactly this way, united in the face of uncertainty. "I love you," he said simply, the words slurring slightly as consciousness began to blur. "All of you." The last thing he remembered was Grace brushing his hair back from his forehead, a gesture she'd performed countless times throughout their marriage, across sickbeds and quiet moments and early mornings. Then darkness. When Michael opened his eyes again, the world was gauzy and distant. Fluorescent lights, beeping monitors, the distinctive antiseptic smell of hospital recovery rooms. His head felt simultaneously hollow and too heavy, wrapped in layers of bandages. Grace's face swam into focus above him. "Hey there," she whispered, stroking his arm carefully around the IV line. "Surgery went well. Werner got everything." Michael tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper. Grace anticipated his need, offering a small ice chip from a nearby cup. "James and Lily?" he managed after the cooling relief. "Getting coffee. They've barely left since you went in." Grace checked her watch. That was 11 hours ago. 11 hours. Michael tried to process this information through the fog of anesthesia and pain medication. Nearly half a day lost to unconsciousness while strangers navigated the geography of his brain. "Prognosis?" he asked, medical terminology feeling strange in his mouth. "Excellent," Grace replied, and Michael could hear the genuine relief in her voice. "Clean margins, the pathology confirmed benign. You'll need follow-up MRIs, but Werner is very optimistic." Michael felt tears leak from the corners of his eyes, tracking down to dampen the hospital pillow. Not from pain, but from overwhelming relief. Grace gently wiped them away. "The headaches?" he asked. "Should improve dramatically. The memory issues too, though there might be some temporary confusion while the swelling subsides." Michael nodded slightly, careful not to disturb the massive bandage. "I remember everything important," he assured her. "You, the kids, 25 years. Grace smiled tremulously. "Good to know my anniversary gift wasn't completely overshadowed by your dramatic medical reveal." "The watch," Michael remembered. "Perfect gift. I'm sorry mine came with such complications." "I still haven't worn it," Grace admitted. "Seemed like bad luck before the surgery, but I brought it." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the velvet box. "I thought maybe now it could be a recovery milestone. Something to look forward to, seeing me wear it when you're well enough to take me to dinner again." Michael managed a weak smile. "Deal." The door opened as James and Lily returned, their faces lighting with relief at seeing him conscious. They approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid he might break with too much enthusiasm. "How's the head, Professor Dad?" James asked, his attempt at casual belied by the emotion in his voice. "Still attached?" Michael replied, "which I consider a win." Lily immediately checked his monitors and IV, earning an eye roll from Grace. "Once a doctor's child, always a doctor's child," she teased her daughter. The family settled into quiet conversation as afternoon faded to evening, discussing everything except the surgery, campus updates from James, Lily's challenging patients, departmental gossip from Grace's practice. Normal family talks that felt extraordinarily precious now. When visiting hours ended, Grace insisted on staying overnight, transforming the stiff recliner beside his bed into makeshift accommodations. The children reluctantly departed with promises to return at first light. In the dimmed quiet of the hospital room, with Grace's steady breathing nearby and the regular beeping of monitors marking his continued existence, Michael found himself thinking of the diamond necklace that had accidentally revealed his secret. "Grace?" he whispered into the semi-darkness. She was beside him instantly, fully alert despite her exhaustion. "When we get home," he said slowly, words still thick from medication, "I think I'll start writing that book. The one James remembered." Grace's smile was visible even in the low light. I think that's an excellent idea. And maybe we should travel more. See those places we've always talked about. She nodded, understanding completely what he wasn't explicitly saying, that brushes with mortality had a way of reprioritizing dreams deferred too long. One day at a time, she reminded him gently. First, you heal. Then everything else, Michael agreed, reaching for her hand. Outside the hospital window, stars appeared in the clear night sky, constant, enduring, unchanged by the day's events. Inside, the gentle pressure of Grace's fingers entwined with his anchored Michael to the present moment, to survival, to the precious continuation of ordinary days that no luxury gift could ever replace.